The year was 1991. Freddy had been declared dead, and Jason had gone to Manhattan 2 years before, and there were no signs of his return on the horizon. Michael Myers had been sprung from jail 3 years before, but was nowhere to be found. It looked like the 90s were leaving the horror icons behind and moving on. But then there was a buzz coming from a particular legend with a less than consistent reputation. That icon was Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Campbell. I am an author, a photographer, and a director. This is my story, Tales from the Creek Bed. I got my first introduction to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre through the horror section when I was 4. The VHS cover art for the Media Home Entertainment release got my attention. And by getting my attention, I mean it drew me in, almost as in a hypnotic state. The wide-eyed glare of the survivor girl, Sally, and the image of Leatherface dressed in formal attire with his horrific mask and eyes wide opened while approaching with a chainsaw. That image is one of my top 5 VHS horror covers. I would name the rest, but that will be an episode for another day. I grew up with Freddy, recently became a full-scale Jason fan, and John Carpenter's Halloween was regular viewing in my family's home during the Halloween season. But Leatherface, in 1991, was reserved for the most hardcore horror fans. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was not a movie screened on the USA Network or TBS. Chainsaw 2 had come out 5 years before, but was a box office bomb and was released unrated, contributing to the reputation that this was a series destined for the underground. My family had recently moved and stayed with my uncle while we waited for our house to become available. This uncle was my gateway to the extremes. Horror was never off limits, but there were boundaries regarding nudity, violence, and themes. But not with my Uncle Jimmy. This guy's filter was as useful as a coffee filter used 3 times over. It was not holding anything back. The best way I can put it is he openly watched Evil Tunes once in broad daylight with a house full of kids. It may not be surprising that I first watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 with my Uncle Jimmy, but what is surprising is that it happened during breakfast. I can vividly remember my Uncle Jimmy sitting in his recliner with a TV tray across his lap, eating fried eggs, sausage links, and buttered toast, while a cigarette hung from his mouth. He pushed play on the VCR remote, and the movie began to play. Chainsaw 3 is by far the most tame installment in the series, aside from a certain train wreck that shall remain unnamed on this channel.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
For a 7-year-old whose most intense horror experience was an edited version of Friday the 13th, Part 5, this felt like a shift from Metallica's The Black Album
Ripping your pillow tight, exit light, into the night. Take my hand, walk to Neverland.
to Morbid Angel's The Covenant.
Confront me, unholy ones, bastard sin, son of the earth. I summon thee, now poison me, death in the will, murder my soul.
I was astonished by the elements in the story. The peeping Tom in the filthy roadside bathroom, the frequent use of profanity, and the theme of cannibalism. It left quite an impression on me. I must have enjoyed it because immediately after, I got a play school circular saw, went outside, and played my version of Leatherface. 3 years later, when I was 10 and had fully embraced my love for horror movies, I watched the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its sequel, Part 2. Interestingly, I watched the second part during breakfast at a friend's house. The first film became my gold standard for the series. In my opinion, it was lightning in a bottle. Tobe Hooper, despite his many talents, would never reach that level of excellence again, and horror truly elevated to a new standard with that masterpiece. However, it was the third one that I would choose for sleepovers and public viewing. The first movie required a certain level of sophistication to fully appreciate. The second was like Hell's version of Pee-wee's Playhouse, but Part 3 was gruesome yet polished enough to make it a great choice for sleepovers. During one particular overnight stay, my guest and I got a legendary scare from the movie, with a little help from my neighbors. Our neighbors owned a souped-up 1977 Chevy pickup truck that was so loud it rattled our windows and set off car alarms. The headlights were bright enough to wash out our entire living room. I'm not sure if he was aware of the timing, but my neighbor decided to start his truck and rev the engine at the perfect moment. It was so bright and loud that we all thought someone would drive directly into our living room for a brief moment. I recall everyone leaping into the air and scattering in every direction. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 serves as a time capsule of its era, representing one of the last films to emerge from the waning days of 80s horror. Although it was produced and released in the 90s, it retains all the characteristics of a late 80s slasher film. The cast includes horror icon Ken Foree, Bill Butler, and Jennifer Banco, both of whom appeared in Friday the 13th Part 7. Tom Everett, known for his role in Best of the Best, improvised much of his dialogue in this film.
We don't have good dad no more. You remind me of my last girl, down in Tupelo. Well, you're gonna go down below. Is it soup yet?
Kate Hodge, who co-starred in Rapid Fire alongside Brandon Lee, is also featured.
Okay. All right. You and me then, huh? You sick.
As is Viggo Mortensen, famously known for his role in Lord of the Rings. Additionally, Kane Hodder contributed stunt work, portraying Leatherface. The directing responsibilities for the project would be handled by Jeff Burr, the director of Stepfather 2. Other directors, including Tom Savini and Peter Jackson, were offered the position but declined for various reasons. As a child dreaming of becoming a movie director, my aim was not necessarily to emulate someone like Steven Spielberg. Even back then, I was realistic about my creative vision, but I believed it would be incredible to be included on a list of directors for films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, being a hired gun who directs horror sequels. That was my childhood dream. Slasher films of the 1980s emerged in two distinct waves. The first wave featured titles like Friday the 13th, The Burning, Sleepaway Camp, and Silent Night, Deadly Night. In my opinion, 1986 marked the rise of the second wave. Although A Nightmare on Elm Street, released in 1984, set a new standard, it acted more as a bridge to the new aesthetic that was developing. The year 1986 introduced us to A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Friday the 13th Part 6. At this point, horror had truly embraced an MTV-inspired style. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 was part of the MTV trend that had overtaken slasher films, featuring extensive backlighting, fog, rich colors, Hollywood actors, and a killer soundtrack. Regarding influence, I cannot underestimate how much the second wave of slasher films from the late 80s has affected my approach to lighting scenes. I've even conducted a series of photo shoots where I created my own fake late 80s slasher film posters. My introduction to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise came through Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It provided plenty of scares during sleepovers and sparked my interest in thrash metal. The film also contributed to my love for the late 80s horror aesthetic, which still resonates with me today. I'm not ashamed to admit that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 Leatherface had a significant influence on me. Leave a comment below. How does this movie hold up for you? Also, make sure to like and subscribe. It goes a long way to keep this channel growing. Until next time, I'm Jeremy Campbell saying don't be scared to be yourself.